In October 2022, an explorer who considered himself quite experienced decided to challenge himself by venturing into unexplored sections of a cave located on private property. For someone like him, most of the cave posed little difficulty until the return journey. That's when something unexpected happened. Something that, without a doubt, would mark that day in his memory forever. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Abyssin. Today, we're diving into a cave exploration story that took a terrifying turn. And of course, if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps the channel more than you know. October 7th, 2022 started off like any other day in the Black Hills of South Dakota. 3 cave explorers were preparing near an unmarked entrance to Mystic Cave, a little-known underground system on private land. Among them was a speleologist. His name wasn't mentioned in the article where I found the story, but he was described as tall, lean, and highly experienced, shaped by years of navigating tight passages and vertical climbs. He double-checked his helmet light, tested the batteries, and inspected his mapping gear. His companions, also seasoned in the field, carried lightweight packs with water, energy bars, and additional tools for surveying. Their objective that day was to explore and chart a newly opened path deep within the cave system. They entered Mystic Cave around 9 a.m. The beginning of the journey was relatively comfortable, with wide passages and enough headroom to walk upright. But that quickly changed. Before long, they were crawling through tight tunnels, their bodies pressed flat against the ground. After roughly 40 minutes, they reached what had previously been the farthest accessible point of the cave, a small chamber with a ceiling so low it forced them to stay hunched over. In one of the corners, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look, there was an opening marked by recent excavation. Previous trips had focused on widening this promising spot, slowly digging out a narrow passage just wide enough for a single person to squeeze through. Beyond that, it was uncharted territory. The most experienced of the group volunteered to go first. Despite his height, which posed an obvious challenge in such tight spaces, he had mastered the techniques needed to maneuver through places most would consider impassable. Calm and confident, he examined the hole with his headlamp, then removed his helmet and set it aside. The passage looked to be just about 9 to 10 inches high, with a sharp right turn only a few feet in. He laid down and began the slow, methodical process of entering the crevice. The cold rock pressed against his chest and back, draining his body heat almost instantly. There was no room to lift his head. The only way to see was by twisting his neck slightly, something that became uncomfortable very quickly. After moving forward nearly 6 feet, he encountered the first major obstacle, a 90-degree turn. Navigating it required careful coordination. Every inch forward meant his clothes scraped against the jagged rock, creating resistance he had to overcome with sheer physical force. Soon after that first turn, another appeared, this time bending the opposite direction, forming an S-shaped path that would become the real challenge of the day. Still, he kept pushing forward, contorting his body to fit the shape of the tunnel. The second curve was even tighter. But past it, the passage sloped upward unexpectedly into a tiny chamber where, at last, he could sit up. The small discovery brought momentary relief. It was a new segment of the cave and could prove valuable for mapping efforts. He took a deep breath, enjoying the brief freedom of movement before turning his thoughts to the return trip. He'd need to descend that sloped section headfirst and make his way back through the S-shaped passage, only this time in reverse. The trouble began the moment he positioned himself to exit. As he tried to move downward, he realized the approach from that angle was far worse. The natural bends his body had followed going in now worked against him. His legs, in particular, couldn't replicate the movements his arms and shoulders had performed earlier. After about 15 minutes of trying, the first real warning sign hit. He couldn't get his legs back through the second bend. He experimented with multiple positions, but nothing worked. Each failed attempt drained his energy and pushed his heart rate higher, making him breathe faster in the tight space. It felt as though the tunnel was closing in, even though he knew that wasn't physically possible. His companions, waiting in the small room just beyond the passage, soon realized something was wrong. They could barely reach his outstretched hands. They tried to pull while he pushed with his legs, but the angle of the tunnel worked against them. After an hour of futile efforts, the truth was clear. He was completely stuck, unable to move more than a foot in either direction. His position was excruciating. The cool temperature that once felt refreshing now threatened his health. Unable to move and pressed against the cold rock, hypothermia became a very real danger. After 2 hours, his teammates made a tough decision. They needed outside help. One of them stayed with him, while the other began the 40-minute journey back to the surface to call for rescue. You can imagine, spending hours in that position wasn't just physically painful, it was psychologically overwhelming. Time dragged endlessly. 4 hours after getting stuck, the first rescuers arrived. Local cave rescue specialists from the Paha Sapa Grotto team. They brought food, water, thermal packs, a communication line to the surface, and most importantly, tools to widen the tunnel. From the beginning, the rescue was an enormous challenge. Even the smallest rescuers could barely reach his head and one hand. The hammer drill, their primary tool, could only be used from awkward positions, limiting its effectiveness. Every tiny chunk of rock removed was a hard-won success, measured in inches. Noticing clear signs of worsening hypothermia, rescuers intensified their efforts. They sent in more thermal packs and covered whatever parts of his body they could reach with emergency blankets. All night long, they worked in shifts, drilling through solid rock. The sound was deafening in the tight space, and the stone dust irritated his eyes and lungs. But each fragment removed was progress. Around the 15-hour mark, they finally cleared enough room for him to bend his knees slightly, the first time he'd been able to change position in over half a day. That small shift gave him a renewed sense of hope. Close to 6 a.m. on October 8th, after 18 hours of being completely immobilized, the final push succeeded. As they pulled on the rescue straps, he felt his body slide through the newly widened bend. In the small chamber just past the point where he had been stuck, they wrapped him in thermal blankets and gave him warm fluids. Amazingly, he had no serious injuries. The journey back to the surface took twice the normal time. When he finally emerged into the morning light, he knew he'd never look at tight spaces the same way again. What used to be a technical challenge was now something he'd treat with deep and permanent respect. If you found this story fascinating, wait until you check out the one that's on your screen right now. It started out as a simple adventure, much like this one, but ended in a far worse way. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really helps a lot. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.